Hello everyone. In this video we are going to talk about everything you need to know about the AP Physics 1 exam. And I'm going to start by introducing myself. I am Dr. Diliberti and I currently teach physics, honors physics and AP Physics 1 at Laurel Springs. But I've also taught these same courses in a traditional public school for over 25 years. In my traditional school I also taught AP Physics C, and I have graded AP Physics exams for the College Board multiple times. So I feel like I have a lot of insight that I can give you in terms of preparing for your AP Physics exam. I'm going to pause here for a minute. I also have a set of guided notes that you can download to take notes that go along with this video. So I'll pause and I'll close that one. Okay, so this presentation is going to go over everything you need to know about the actual test day and format of the exam, the different types of free response questions you're going to find on the AP Physics exam, and we'll talk through all of those, different topics that are on the AP Physics exam. We will also look at briefly the science practices and task verbs that the AP Physics exam is based on, and lastly end with how you can best prepare for the exam in the coming weeks yourself. All right, test day. You are all taking the AP Physics exam somewhere, someplace, and I don't know where that is. So please make sure that you note on the guided notes the actual date of the AP Physics exam and time, the testing location, the building, the room number, where you need to park, etc. The official start time of the AP Physics exam. Just because the exam may start at a certain time, you usually have to be there a little bit earlier, so make sure that you ask that of the place that you are testing at. The official end time. The exam is 3 hours long, but you end up having to get there early. It also takes some time for them to gather all the materials at the end and account for everything, so you're usually there longer than the end time. If you finish early, usually you cannot leave prior to that, so in general, usually you're there about 4 hours, even though it's a 3-hour exam. What do you need to bring to the AP Physics 1 exam? Since you are taking an exam at perhaps not your home school, you need to bring photo ID, like a driver's license or some sort of government issued photo ID, or at best or at worst a school ID. You need to have number 2 pencils and blue or black pens, multiple pencils, multiple pens. Make sure you have a good eraser. Do not bring mechanical pencils. And you need a TI graphing calculator for the AP Physics exam. You should also bring extra batteries. If for some reason your calculator goes dead, that's going to become your problem. And on the AP Physics exam, you're also expected to have a ruler. The ruler is only used not to measure things, but to be a straight edge. When they ask you to draw a best fit line, they don't want just some line sketched on a piece of paper. They want you to use a ruler to make that best fit line really linear so that it can be used to find the slope, etc. So don't forget to bring a ruler. All right, and TI calculators, TI-84, the traditional calculator here on the left, or if you have an Inspire, that is fine also, either one of those. I also would add to that list, sometimes you're in a room that doesn't have a clock, and I think for pacing yourself, it's helpful to have a watch, but if you bring a watch, make sure it doesn't tick, make sure it's not a smart watch or a Fitbit or anything like that. They won't let you use. So just a standard regular watch. Okay, the format of the exam. It's a 3-hour exam. It's divided into 2 parts, 90-minute multiple choice, 90-minute free response. The multiple choice, 50 multiple choice questions. The first 45 questions are traditional multiple choice questions. where there is only one best answer. But the last couple of questions, read the directions carefully because you have to pick two and sometimes or more best answers. So note that the last couple of questions are kind of like non-traditional multiple choice. The free response. If you've been in a physics class such as Laurel Springs that is heavily based on problem solving, you might be surprised at the AP Physics 1 exam. The AP Physics 1 exam excuse me, has more writing on it than you may expect. So there's always going to be 5 questions. I use the word questions because sometimes the question could be a problem, but many times it requires a written response. These are the 5 questions. They are not always in this order, but there's going to be an experimental design question, a qualitative quantitative translation question. There's going to be a paragraph argument, short answer question, and 2 short answer questions or problems. And you can see that the point values for each of those types of questions is different. Next, we're going to go over each of these individual types in a little bit more detail so you know what I mean by that. We'll start with the experimental design. An experimental design says this question type assesses students' ability to design and describe a scientific investigation, analyze authentic laboratory data, and identify patterns. So, for example, the question might be, design an experiment to determine the acceleration due to gravity at your location. You might have, and then it might end by saying, you have access to all standard physics laboratory equipment. So you might have to, right now, you're writing like in a paragraph form, kind of like, I'll say a lab report. This is the equipment that I will need. This is how I'm going to arrange the equipment. This is the data that I'm going to collect. These are you also sometimes have to sketch a data table. These are the units that I'm going to use to measure the data that I collect. These are the calculations that I'm going to have to do. Then I'm going to have to graph the data this way. I'll plot the points. I'll sketch a best fit line. The slope of the best fit line will give me the answer. And you're writing all of that out because you are designing an experiment to do a certain thing. Sometimes if other parts of other questions are taking a little bit more time, they'll skimp on the experimental design question, and instead they might give you a list of equipment and ask you to check which of these pieces you would use. They might give you a data table with some data already in it and then ask you to explain what you do with that data, etc., etc. So there's going to be some sort of experimental design question. There will also be a quantitative qualitative translation. This question type asks students to translate between quantitative and qualitative justification and reasoning. What that means is quantitative means with numbers. Qualitative means like with an explanation. So you might have a problem or a question that you might quantitatively solve for something. So it's just like a normal physics problem. But then to go into the translation means like going back and forth. So now to take something that's quantitative, we get an answer, and then to turn it qualitative, they might say, well, if the mass increased, then what would happen to the acceleration, and explain why. So now you are making a justification in words of what would happen. And then they might go back to a quantitative piece and then translate back to a qualitative piece. And so the quantitative is using your physics equations and things like you normally do, and then the qualitative is explaining changes that might occur if something changes, what other changes might occur. I'm going to have a separate video that works through a quantitative qualitative translation with you, And the example that I'm going to be using is from the 2017 exam, problem number 4. A paragraph argument. It says, write a paragraph length response which consists of a coherent argument about a physics phenomena that uses information presented in the question and proceeds in a logical, expository fashion. So, you fire something off the top of a tall building at the same time you drop an object. What would happen? Write a paragraph length response with a cohesive argument, blah, blah, blah. So it means, can you explain a physics concept clearly and logically to the reader? Like, do you really understand what is happening, and do you deeply understand that concept? I'm going to also do a separate video on a paragraph argument from 2015, number 4. And then the last one, the short answer questions. These are probably more your typical physics problem solving questions that you're used to. And there's going to be 2 of those. And I'm going to do a separate video of a typical short answer question that you might see. And I'm going to pick one from 2015, problem number 1. So those are separate videos. I'm not doing an experimental design because I think I just explained that one to you. Okay, topics on the exam. In Laurel Springs, our course is based on the Giancoli textbook that we use. However, not everything in the Giancoli textbook is on the AP Physics 1 exam. So I'm going to buzz through very quickly what is not on the exam and highlight things that you should focus on. So for every variable that we have talked about, or every measure, you should know the standard SI units. So that's something to look at. You should also know how to do a best fit line. So when you draw a best fit line and you have to find the slope of that best fit line, you can pick any 2 points on the line, not data points, but any 2 points on the line, or you can put the data in your calculator and do linear regression. That is usually the preferred method. If you use your calculator to find the slope of the best fit line, make sure you write that on the exam. I am using linear regression in my calculator to determine this equation, so they know where it comes from. I want to point out that the topic of uncertainty is on the exam conceptually. Like, you need to know that when you measure something, there's always a plus or minus, it's not always a perfect measurement. And that's why sometimes we measure something like 3 times and then take the average to help minimize that uncertainty. But there will not be calculations related to uncertainty on the AP exam. Kinematics, all of those topics are on the exam. Dynamics, this is a heavily weighted topic on the exam, all there. In circular motion, the Laurel Springs course also included some of Kepler's laws. Those will not be on our AP Physics exam. Conservation of energy is a big topic. There's for sure going to be conservation of energy on the exam. Momentum, another big topic, for sure going to be there. Conservation of momentum, big topic. In Laurel Springs, we also talked about center of mass and how to calculate the center of mass of something. Those calculations will not be on the exam. Simple harmonic motion, we also learned the sinusoidal nature of how to write an equation for the position, the velocity, or the acceleration. That will not be on the exam. And in rotation, whoops, I have orc instead of work. Pop this back up. The topics of rotational work, power, kinetic energy that involves rolling is not on the exam. So conservation of energy is on the exam, but not conservation of energy of something that is rolling. In angular momentum and conservation of angular momentum, again, another big topics. All right, so those are the topics that you should look at. Next, you should be aware of the science practices and the task verbs. So I'm going to start with the task verbs. There are, I think there's 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 13. There are 13 verbs. So all of those free response questions and problems are going to start with one of these 13 verbs. And it is helpful to know what the verbs are and to know what they mean. For example, derive. If you have to derive something, that means that you have to start with an equation and perform a series of mathematical steps, like literally doing a derivation like you would do in math class. And in physics, it might start with a free body diagram. That means drawing a picture, coming up with the equation, and then walking through those derived steps. Calculate. That also starts with an equation, and it is a mathematical calculation that gives you the answer. Explain, justify, state, verify. Those are all words that are going to mean that the answer is not mathematical, that they want you to write your explanation in words in paragraph form. Sketch, draw. That means draw a free body diagram, create a graph, draw a best fit line, draw a linear or an exponential relationship, whatever you see the data doing. Plot, same thing. Label. Label means use units. It means draw arrows, make your arrows to scale, etc., etc. So it's helpful to go through these task verbs so that you kind of have a sense of the detail that goes along with each of them. I'll go back to the science practices. The AP Physics 1 exam is based on these science practices. Like, these are things that real life scientists do, and all the AP science exams are based on these practices. What I want to point out is that mathematical routines, that means solving physics problems, is only one of the science practices. And so modeling, being able to draw a free body diagram, being able to draw a sketch of a momentum problem, the collision, what it looks like before, what it looks like after the collision, all those types of things that we tried to highlight during the school year are part of the science practices on the AP Physics 1 exam. All right, and I'm going to pause here for a second. I want to point out in your guided notes that I gave you, I have all of the topics, but you can cross out the ones that are not on the exam by following along with the PowerPoint. The task verbs are here for you, and the science practices are listed here, but we also have the percentages that the science practices show up on the multiple choice and show up on the free response. And to help you better understand what sort of questions you might see, you can read some details and some examples of each of the science practices on the subsequent pages here. So again, not something to study, but just something to read through to give you a better sense of what to expect. All right, the last thing that we want to look at is how you can best prepare for the exam. Number one, it's not a cram session. You need to start early. So I know you may have more than one AP exam, but in all of those cases, start early, make yourself a little schedule. Twice a week I'm going to do this for English, twice a week I'm going to do this for calculus, twice a week I'm going to do this for physics, etc., etc. And don't save it all until the day or two before the exam. The next thing, download the official equation sheet. Get used to it and compare it to my sheet. So let me explain what I mean by that. So on the AP Physics exam, you're going to be given this set of reference notes for both the multiple choice and the free response section. So let's look at it quickly. So mass of proton, electron, neutron, speed of light, some of the constants that you need, some units, not all of them, but some of them, metric prefixes, And here are the equations. Okay, so these are probably not the forms of the equations that you're used to. I don't know why they make their equation sheet so confusing. But anyway, so here are the equations that they're going to give you. So you can look at them and you can say, oh, I have them, so I'm not going to panic about the equations. But I will tell you, they don't give you all of them. So I made a sheet. Oh, I must have closed it. Hold on, I'll find it here for you. I will find it. Give me one sec. All right, so this is also available for you as a download. All right, so I created a list of equations by each unit. So for one-dimensional kinematics, these are the equations you need to know. Look at this list and compare it to this list. Are they all there, or are some missing? You're going to find out some are missing. If you look at dynamics, these are the equations we used when we solved dynamics problems, and there's somewhere on, whoops, that's the list there. But you're going to find out on this list, all they have is F equals ma, and they didn't even write F equals ma in a convenient way, and this is the friction equation. Anyways, my point though is you might use my equation as you're studying, but you don't get to use my list on the AP Physics exam. So you need to kind of compare these two lists so that you know what you will have at your disposal and what you won't have at your disposal. All right, the next thing. Use resources from the AP Classroom website. You may be used to this if you take AP classes in your traditional public school, but in the Laurel Springs course, the AP Physics, the resources on the AP Classroom website were not part of our course. However, they have great resources on the AP Classroom website. I think it is the most beneficial thing that you can do is to use the AP Classroom website. That's what everybody across the country is using. The negative side of that is that there's so much information there that you can get overwhelmed. So use it if it's helpful to you. If it gets overwhelming, that you might want to go to a different site that gives you, kind of filters it a little bit more. So how do you access the AP Classroom website? So it is going to be in the Laurel Springs course. Whoops, I have to. And I am not in the right spot, so give me a sec. Give me one sec. Sorry about this. All right, so I'm going to go all the way. So I am right here under the second folder, which is called Course Resources. And when I go down to Course Resources, right there, AP Classroom section. And so if you click on that, it tells you how to join the AP Classroom section, and there's lots of resources you'll find on that site. All right, let's go back. So Laurel Springs also gives you another resource called Shmoop. So this is some third-party website that creates AP review materials. So it's kind of like similar to going to Barnes & Noble and buying an AP review book from Princeton Review. This company is called Shmoop. All right, so AP Test Prep, AP Physics 1 Test Prep. I'm going to click on, this is just generic, I'm going to click on AP Physics 1. So this now gives you the directions for how to get into the Shmoop site. So this one took me already in it. I don't know if it's because I already registered or if you have to register first, but anyways, the directions are all there in the LMS. So there are just some example questions here, but it's a diagnostic test. So supposedly, as you go through, it kind of learns what you're good at and learns what you're not so good at and filters things for you. So the AP Physics or the AP Classroom site is going to have everything, but the Shmoop is going to filter things a little bit, which may be a little bit, I'll say, less overwhelming, but a third party is probably not going to give you as pointed questions as the AP people themselves who did the AP Classroom, who are the same people who are writing the exam. So take that with a grain of salt. All right, and the last thing, if both of those become a little bit too overwhelming for you and you need something a little bit more concrete, you don't like the electronic kind of studying, then I recommend you go to Barnes & Noble, you buy an AP Physics test review book, and you just work through it chapter by chapter by chapter. So there's only 7 units. So in that sense, if you can kind of divide your studying down to at least 7 or 14 days, you can spend 1 or 2 days per unit and then feel like, okay, I covered the book and I feel pretty good going into the exam. So those are my suggestions for you. So if there's any questions, we can answer those. And if not, please watch my other videos, which will go into a little bit more detail on each of those free response. All right, thank you for joining in today.